Hello everybody, it's Jacob Klein again. Today we're going to talk about hovering flight and some of the basic concepts, principles. This discussion is assuming that we've already gone over basic aerodynamics, how the rotor head works, all the basic components and systems, the controls of the helicopter. So from there, here we go. So hovering flight, very first thing we'll talk about is a vertical takeoff. Well, as you're sitting on the ramp, the very first thing you're going to do in the helicopter, got your collective, your cyclic, pedals, everything's under control, the helicopter has been prepared, and run up, you're going to clear your area. You want to look left and right, check everywhere around you, make sure that you're not going to create some wind for somebody that's going to, send something cascading off. Make sure people around you are minding their doors. It's a big one on our ramp, so that you don't blow a door off. Once that's completed, what you're going to do is slowly start to raise your collective. When you feel a little lightness on the skids, you'll probably get some motion from your helicopter one way or the other. You're going to use your cyclic to correct that. Say you get a slight left slide, just give it a little right until that slide just barely stops. And once again, after you stop that motion, you're going to continue to raise. As you're raising collective, and this is going to be something that you'll get used to doing kind of automatically as time goes on, but every time that you raise collective, you're going to need to put in some right pedal to counteract the increase in torque you're creating by increasing the pitch on those blades. So that's something that you'll have to do all the time. So you'll be raising, giving a little right pedal all the time. If you get any motion, you can stop again. It doesn't matter how many times you have to do this. You always want to stop raising and correct that motion with your cyclic. Once you've gotten to the point where one skid or both skids are raising off the ground, you just want to continue a smooth raise until you're between 2 and 5 feet in a steady hover. Once you're at 2 and 5 feet, let things stabilize a little bit, do your gauge scan, and make sure that you're picking a spot out in the horizon. You should have done this, I guess, a minute ago when you started to pick up, but before you even start to raise your collective, you want to pick a spot way out on the horizon. I would say at least 100 feet out. It's going to be something that's not going to move much relative to your position, something that's going to be stable. Don't pick a Cessna that's taxiing by, because next thing you know, you're going to be taxiing with the Cessna, or such and so forth. Alright, so we're in a stable hover. You've checked your gauges. One thing that's going to be happening is you're going to get wind effects. Typically you're not just going to be in no wind conditions. If you have wind, your neutral position for your cyclic is going to be pointed in the direction of that wind to keep you at the same spot where you're sitting. If you have an aft, well, you can't really see it that good on film, so let's say I have a wind that's pushing me this way, so my wind's coming from my left here. My controls naturally are going to radiate towards that wind, into it. The wind's coming from this way, I'm going to be pushing into it, and you're going to hold your neutral position to stay in one spot is going to naturally be into that. Vertical takeoff, so we covered that. The stabilized hover, that's the basic, one of the basic elements is the wind. The other one is, so naturally as we're sitting in the helicopter, our rotor head, we are hanging under it. And this is my little example of that. This would be our rotor head, blades up here, and this is going to be us in the cockpit. For any corrections that we make, for wind, or even if we're just moving in a steady direction, or we're trying to get back over our spot, maybe it's right over here, you have to do that correction twice. You're going to correct into it and then over it again. It's kind of hard to explain, but let me show you. If you only do one motion, say you just move over this way and don't make any second correction, see how the pen's swinging? Well, that's what you're trying to keep from happening by doing a double correction. So I move to the right, stop, and then a little bit further over the pen. And you'll see my hand which is the rotor head, which is your hand on the collective, or on the cyclic I mean, is what you have to pretend you're flying. And this is you in the cockpit, so you've got to make those corrections twice. Left, stop, and then get that hand just a little bit ahead of where you know you're going to swing. You know it's going to happen. Single motion, you're going to swing. Double motion is over the top of and then reposition. And always chase that swing. That's kind of how you get your basic stable hover. Is you always having to predict where you're going to swing to next. Have to keep your head up here in order to keep this stable. For hovering turns, which another word for that is a pedal turn, you have to, sorry, give me just a second. For pedal turns, the easiest way to do a pedal turn is always to the right. It's always going to be right pedal. In our helicopters with a counterclockwise rotating main rotor. Counterclockwise, the reason why right is easier is because you're removing pitch on your tail rotor to achieve that turn. What's actually turning you is not your tail rotor at this point. The lack of thrust of that tail rotor for compensation for your main rotor is what's turning you. So honestly, it's your main rotor that's turning you to the right. And by using the right pedal, you're actually using less power from your drivetrain. So it's less stressful on the helicopter, and you have a lot more pedal to correct and stop that turn once you've finished. Left turns is going to be exactly the opposite. If you do any left pedal turns, you're using a lot more pitch on that tail rotor, which, along with using more power from the engine, gets you closer to loss of tail rotor effectiveness, reaching that critical angle of attack on the tail rotor, and getting a tail rotor vortex ring state, which basically you're losing all effectiveness because of, and we should have already gone over this in aerodynamics, but it's the same as settling with power with your main rotor, but with your tail rotor. Next thing is going to be forward flight. Anytime you start any direction of flight in a hover, what you're doing is revectoring this thrust that's keeping you airborne. And once you revector that, you move, say we want this helicopter to move to the front, what we're doing is revectoring thrust so that that thrust, instead of being facing perfectly upward, is going to be facing partly forward. So part of that thrust is converted into forward motion. Therefore, we're going to lose altitude unless we add some collective. Any motion or any movement in a hover or from a stabilized hover in any direction is going to require a little bit of a pull on the collective. And it's not much, but you'll get used to doing that automatically. And can you tell me what happens when you pull collective? You're going to have to also do what? Right. When you pull collective, you're always going to have to give a little more right pedal. Alright, good. So I think you're starting to catch on to this. Next thing up, sideward flight. The main point on sideward flight, there's two things that I'm going to talk about. One is maintaining your altitude. Once you start that sideward flight, any loss in altitude and you're going to catch a skid and you can have dynamic rollover. So you want to always make sure that you're doing that little pull and collective once you start moving. Stay above 2 to 5 feet. Even if you have to go a little bit higher than that, no big deal. There's no sheriff around who's going to be like, you went over 5 feet, you're broke. So just stay a little bit higher than you should maybe. The other thing about sideward flight is, I was just going to tell you my favorite technique is I like to get my eyes on wherever I'm going. It's part of the reason I love to be a helicopter pilot is we can fly in any direction we want to, including backwards. Not recommended, but yeah, we can. So take your spot, get your eyes on it, and for sideward flight, just like you're saying, you take that spot, push your collective directly towards that, or your cyclic directly towards that spot until you start to move. And any flight and hover, once you start motion, you're going to give a little bit less cyclic just to maintain that rate of speed that you've started. You don't want to continue accelerating, which is what would happen if you just, okay, I'm going left and held it this way. You're just going to continue to accelerate. So you get that little acceleration push, a little collective pull, and then you recenter slightly. You're not going all the way back to neutral, but just enough that you can maintain that momentum. Once you've come to as far as you want to go, you're going to go opposite of that, which takes and vectors your thrust. We're moving this way, vectors your thrust back the other way, and then slowly center as you come to a stop. And you'll really start to get the feel for this the more you do it, but the smoothness and controls for any hovering flight is critical. In any form of flight in helicopter, anything we do, that you'll hear that over and over again, is smoothness and controls in everything we do. This is going to be the easiest on the aircraft, and it's going to eliminate breaking things or overcompensating, which is one of the common failures for any type of hovering flight. So after sideward flight, the last thing that, and the only reason I even bring it up at all is because it's in our rotorcraft flying handbook, is hover taxi. But everything that we just talked about with hovering flight is what you need to know to do a hover taxi. So we've kind of already covered that. So I guess from there, the summary, we would be, yeah, we covered vertical takeoff to a hover, the stabilized hover, hovering turn, which is the pedal turns, forward flight, sideward flight, and hover taxis. And we touched on a little bit of aerodynamics, but I didn't want to get too far into that because I think that detracts from just the basic concepts of controlling your flight. But I appreciate everybody's time, and I'll see you next time around.